As crowds gathered in St. Peter's Square to witness the rise of a new pope, a shocking message from West Africa began circulating with unusual speed. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso had written to Pope Leo XIV with an unexpected statement that bypassed ceremony and addressed the church with clear demands. President Traoré wrote from the soil of his own country, where revolutions have left their mark and where the people who elected him still live with the weight of that history. This wasn't a press release written from a European embassy or a UN office. This message came directly from Burkina Faso, written from within the place Traoré serves and lives. Pope Leo XIV now leads a global institution with authority that extends well beyond Rome. It reaches Burkina Faso. It reaches the churches built by local hands, the open-air services, the catechism classes taught without supplies, and the people who still show up on Sundays despite everything else happening around them. So why speak up right away? Because Traoré understood the moment. A new papacy brings attention. It opens a brief window where the world listens a little more closely. He used that window to remind the church that millions of its members live in places where foreign influence, political violence, and economic extraction are part of everyday life. He introduced himself through experience rather than title. His leadership wasn't shaped by European institutions or foreign think tanks. It formed in villages where roads break down and trust is earned directly. He made that point early, not to draw sympathy, but to establish clarity about who he is as well as who he speaks for. The letter set a tone that was steady, not angry. It made one thing obvious. Traoré wasn't waiting for approval. He was making contact, on behalf of the continent, on his terms. From here he turned to history, a record that continues to shape decisions made across the continent. The relationship between Africa and the Church began through conflict and has remained complex ever since. Traoré pointed to a reality that remains visible across the continent. The churches stand next to colonial infrastructure. Roads that once moved missionaries also carried military convoys. In many places, faith and empire expanded side by side, shaping landscapes, laws, and memory. He described how religious missions often accompanied the spread of European influence. Priests taught scripture, while foreign administrators drafted new policies. Churches grew alongside rail lines and trade outposts. The overlap shaped how people came to know both the Bible and the boundaries of their homelands. Traoré connected these early patterns to what still exists today. Armed patrols guard mineral-rich zones. Foreign agreements continue to govern extraction rights. International bases operate near communities with limited public services. Decisions made far away continue to affect lives across the continent. Yet through these shifts, American faith communities have stayed active. They've preserved sacred texts, constructed churches using available materials, while also continuing traditions in places affected by drought, political instability, or cross-border conflict. Their commitment to belief has remained visible across generations. He spoke to the consistency of that devotion, while also pointing to the broader systems surrounding it. Global firms maintain contracts in regions shaped by colonial histories. Policymakers abroad continue to shape economic outcomes in African capitals. In many communities, these dynamics intersect with daily religious life. Traoré asked the church to engage with that intersection. He described moments when public focus turned elsewhere, yet local consequences persisted. The influence of international systems doesn't pause when the headlines move on. It continues through disrupted supply chains, currency devaluation, and public trust that takes longer to rebuild than to lose. He asked whether the church could extend beyond pastoral care by entering the spaces where decisions shape how people live, how they sustain themselves, and what paths remain open to them over time. With that foundation laid, he turned to what such engagements could look like, starting with clear, active leadership from the Pope himself. Traoré then brought the focus to what is happening now. He described the movement of uranium through Niger under international oversight. He outlined how gold flows from Congolese mines under armed protection. He also detailed how weapons enter contested regions through international transactions. These patterns, he explained, show how economic control and regional unrest often follow the same paths. He presented these realities as matters the Church is positioned to address with clarity. The Vatican manages formal diplomacy and regularly hosts heads of state. It maintains a public voice that reaches across continents. Its leaders speak to governments, deliver official remarks, then travel to regions where media presence intersects with decision-making. Traoré emphasized that this capacity for cross-institutional communication holds influence. He framed these issues as part of daily life for African Catholics. Faith communities navigate environments shaped by shifting trade routes and recurring territorial tensions. Parish leaders support families whose circumstances depend on the outcomes of economic talks and foreign policy decisions. These pressures appear not only during worship, but also in the places where children learn and daily routines unfold. At this point in the letter, he raised a question. Can a religious institution claim global relevance while overlooking the systems that affect its followers directly? Traoré pointed to examples from church tradition. He described figures remembered for stepping into public life with boldness. He referenced moments when spiritual leaders acted during times of civic pressure and institutional uncertainty. These references served to show how moral guidance can remain firm while addressing conditions that stretch beyond theology. He explained that the Vatican's global presence includes relationships with political leaders, as well as access to conversations that shape international agendas. These platforms support the Church's ability to highlight issues that receive limited coverage elsewhere. Above all, he returned to the importance of voice. Voice signals presence. It draws focus. It enters spaces where silence leaves communities isolated. Through voice, the Church demonstrates alignment with people whose lives include belief alongside struggle. Traoré affirmed that this kind of leadership remains fully consistent with the Church's reach and purpose. With this in place, he shifted to the state of Africa itself, a continent engaged in its own momentum, with people shaping the future from within. In the closing section of his message, Traoré turned fully toward the continent he represents. He described a population shaped by history, yet focused on the present. He highlighted leaders who pushed back against colonial pressure, yet left behind a framework for independence. Their influence continues in political movements, political institutions, and everyday conversations. He portrayed African communities as fully engaged in both religious practice and civic responsibility. People gather for worship, then participate in public forums where local issues are addressed. Families teach scripture across generations while also building systems of mutual support. These efforts often unfold together, guided by a shared commitment to structure, stability, and community direction. He emphasized that African Catholics understand their place in the global Church. They recognize the scale of the institution. They remain attentive to how policies develop, which countries receive attention, as well as which voices reach Rome. He stated that their presence continues with or without recognition, because their expectations for leadership remain clear. Traoré described engagement as a choice with measurable outcomes. He explained that papal visits draw public attention, that official statements shift perception, and that silence shapes trust just as clearly as speech. These effects, he said, reach from major cities to remote parishes. Communities respond to what they hear, or what they don't. He encouraged the Pope to speak from regions that receive limited attention. Refugee settlements carry histories shaped by conflict, sustained through devotion. Rural churches continue their work under pressure from unstable borders, shifting prices, and fragile economies. In major cities, congregations respond to rapid population movement shaped by external markets. Each of these settings, Traoré stated, contributes to the Church's global life and calls for recognition. He framed the continent as already moving forward. Institutions are being built. Coalitions are forming. The next generation is growing up within structures that reflect both tradition and change. Traoré positioned this as a moment where shared responsibility becomes possible. With this in mind, he offered an invitation,